So Maine vacation cannot happen without having some Maine oysters, and if there's a system that can accelerate shellfish growth, we should all be happy, and good for the farmers, good for us. And to talk about a system is Matt Nixon.
All right, thank you, Bina, and thanks again everyone who's here. My name is Matt Nixon. I'm the owner and founder of Muddy River Farm Aquaponics. I'm also a PhD student in aquaculture and aquatic resources here in Orono. Faculty, or adjunct faculty at University of Southern Maine. And I think as previous Justin had earlier said, well, we won't go there. Let's kick this off. So I worked for the state for way too long in marine resource management. And that job essentially gave me the ability to see some of the issues that were currently facing industries in Maine, and also gave me some thoughts as to how to solve some of those issues. So we're here to talk about Oyster Pod, which is an upland saltwater recirculation system for shellfish growth. Not specifically for oysters, but that's what we're using right now. So the oceans are changing globally in many ways, much faster than we originally anticipated, and they aren't going to get any better anytime soon. We need essentially a new paradigm shift in the way we manage our marine resources, and we need to think about mitigation, adaptation, and innovation. Issues associated with climate change like acidification and water temperatures impact all fisheries, not just aquaculture. But aquaculture is not exempt from those impacts. In addition to climate change impacts, aquaculture also faces business challenges today, which include the cost of labor, the cost of gear, which are exorbitant compared to some of the wild harvest fisheries like lobstering, regulations, permitting, and of course seasonality. In the northern latitude states, you can't grow oysters year-round as you can in southern states. So for a company that makes around $1 million gross annual profit, you can see here some of the numbers. You need about $400,000 of that for labor alone, just to manage turning the stock, bringing the stock in, culling the stock, tumbling the stock, and then delivering the stock. You also face a 25 to 30% loss because you're reliant on environmental conditions. So a lot of times you'll have a harmful algal bloom that comes into play, kills off some of your stock. You'll have suffocation that happens on the farm itself, and just other issues associated with water temperature fluctuations. And of course, every year you have to buy new gear because your gear gets beat up while it's out in the ocean all summer. So you're looking at around a gross profit of about $340,000 before other expenses like insurance, your boat costs, your lease costs, delivery expenses. Insurance is ridiculous. My company did an MTI-funded shellfish industry-wide survey last summer where we asked a number of shellfish growers what the biggest issues presenting themselves were at the time. Gear, obviously, 45% mentioned that. Labor was 40%, supply was 45%. In addition to these issues, aquaculture is also facing embayment closures by regulatory agencies. They face rampant NIMBYism in a lot of places around the state who don't want to see a facility that's a bit more permanent than a lobster boat is. And of course, they also face seasonality. You don't grow oysters in the winter typically in the ocean because the temperature and food availability in the water column is just not there. So what's the solution? The Oyster Pod, this wacky thing up here in the picture. This is it's a recirculation device based on the principles of vertical agriculture. So with any type of upland aquaculture, meaning aquaculture that's upland, not in the ocean, you have to worry about expenses like overhead and feed, because in the ocean you don't need electricity and you don't need feed. That all comes. So you need to basically account for those costs in your profit or in your return on investment. So using principles of vertical agriculture and a 3D printed device made out of bioplastics and wood flour that was printed actually in that building right there 2 years ago now. The device will grow oysters in a fraction of the time, about a quarter of the time it takes on a lease in the ocean, and it will potentially triple annual production for a small shellfish farm because it's able to grow year round as opposed to just late spring, summer, and early fall. So when you see that same $1 million gross annual profit, you're looking at around $12,000 for labor because this is really set it and leave it. You do have to feed it occasionally, but it has a self-replicating food source, or semi-self-replicating. The big green tank on the bottom functions as a photobioreactor for a tetrasomes phytoplankton that is fed to the oysters and then moved through high velocity, basically force feeding them, making them grow quicker. So you have much less product loss because you're not exposed to the environment, and you don't also have no gear replacement at all, because once you buy this thing, it's going to operate for hopefully 10 years, and you're not going to have it beat up by the ocean every year. Model. There's two models here, really. The first one that I'm primarily focusing on is purchasing small seed either from a farm or direct from a hatchery, putting that seed into the device itself, growing it out to just under market size minus 1 month, and then selling the oysters back to the farm for a small profit. And then they would in turn put that oyster back out on the lease for about a month, because the reason we have so many different kinds of oyster companies in the state is that they all have a different flavor. That's based on salinity content and a variety of other factors that essentially flavor the oyster. So this will also act as a purging period in case they pick up anything nasty in the tank, which of course they won't, but just in case they do. The other option would be licensing the pod. So we would license the technology to a farm. Typically a mid-sized farm. Small farms don't necessarily have facility space for this type of thing. It'll take up about 64 square feet. And then I would provide setup and method consultation with that licensee going forward. So the market itself is vast. In the US alone, there are about 4,000 shellfish growers. New England, there's around 1,261. That number is increasing mainly because southern states that have never actually dabbled in aquaculture are now looking at aquaculture as a savior for some of their wild harvest industries, in particular Georgia and North Carolina, where they've never really had an aquaculture presence. They're now looking at aquaculture because their oyster reefs are going away. Acidification is a big issue, right? And they're now trying to stimulate some of that. Pollution is also a problem. So these are states where you've typically been able to harvest shellfish year-round, and they're now looking to aquaculture as somewhat of a savior. So if we take those 4,000 shellfish farms, we have a conservative estimate of about half the U.S. farms using 24 pod arrays. So that would be 10 of those pods stacked on top of each other. Again, vertical agriculture. We're looking at around a potential industry revenue of about $1.7 billion. In terms of profit for the company, in terms of manufacturing the pods themselves, that potential market is around $250 million, which ain't too bad. So in terms of competition, there are two companies in Maine currently working on upland recirculation seriously. The Maine Shellfish Developers and Running Tide, both of whom rely on the ocean for their water. I make my own salt water. I'm located in Topsom, which is not, it's a coastal town, but it's not a saltwater coastal town. There's also a device called an upweller, which also relies on the ocean to operate, but it will grow an oyster pretty quickly. And then, of course, there's traditional lease, which is what everybody else does. You lease an area from the state, you put your cages out there, and cross your fingers. So, you can see the chart here. I think some of the benefits, in particular, 100% controlled environment, the accelerated oyster growth, and the year-round production. I have question marks next to those checks for the private sector companies because in the oyster or the shellfish industry in general, it's a very tight-knit community, and there's a lot of monkey see, monkey do. And people tend to keep things to their breast, or close to their breast, before they're ready for prime time. So I just don't know, and that's okay, because I'm doing the exact same thing that they're doing, right? We're trying to keep it hush-hush until the IP is there. But the fact that there are other companies working on this is encouraging. Key partners and milestones. As I said, NTI funded my original market discovery, Range 1 grant, hoping for a Range 2 in the future. I also have a cooperative research and development agreement, tech collaboration with the Advanced Structures and Composite Center, again, right next door through the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Department of Energy. They paid for the time on the printer and the time for the engineers that spent taking my wacky ideas and making them into something solid. And then, of course, my industry partner, MIRTA Oyster Company down in Brunswick, has been instrumental in providing me with guinea pigs, which has been fantastic. I hope to have the full-sized device printed by July 2022, so next month. Right now, I have a third scale, fully functional prototype that's been operating for 6 months in the barn behind my house. It has oysters from both Ferta Farm, which you can see a poster of them on the wall over there, and your Oyster prospering. And I actually have some shells from my very minimal loss over there on the table. Hopefully by October 2022, I'll begin commercial production. That's the plan. So, CRL and TRL. Here's the obligatory chart. You can see blue is pre-MIRTA, red is current status. Commercialization, as Renee had mentioned, Renee had mentioned, obviously something that I've had to work on considerably. Technology was, as most other people have indicated, was there. And it's been refined considerably over the last couple years now, actually. Goodness. So questions? Thank you.
This
Yes, sir.
is closed food
Yes, it is.
and food source?
Tetrasalmus frozen algae paste from a company in Utah currently. We make it in Maine, but again, I want that IP in place before I start that process. But it's also made in the Great Salt Lake, and if anyone read the Times article the other day, that's not going to be around for much longer. So I'm going to have to start looking for a new food source here pretty soon. Other thoughts? Cool.